Is this thing on? Can everybody hear me? In the back, can you hear me? Shout out, can you hear me? Oh, all right, I thought something like that, because typically if you test something and the mic typically doesn't work, you do a 1, 2, 3 testing, right? So I'm here to talk to you about testing tools today. So those who thought I was going to do a claying session, that's room 4. Probably. A little bit about myself. I'm Mike Martin. I'm Belgian, and I'm sorry for that. Why? I'm always in. Look at the 9 governments that we have. Not too much about myself, just a QR code with a LinkedIn and a Twitter profile. You can also mail me if you have any questions. I work for Microsoft, but I'm trying to be unbiased of the tools that I'm presenting here. I'm doing this as a community thing, not as a Microsoft representative. Can we all agree on that? So I try not to make it a sales pitch. Yeah? So we go beyond the level 50. Please do so. All right, good. Enough about me. So what is this about? Typically, when we talk about testing, it's all about one word: feedback. Testing is really getting feedback of everything, of any system, of any integration that we have. And actually, I like to expand that a little bit more with one of my favorite acronyms. It's actually more about 4 words. FINO, or failure is not an option. It's always there. Huh? You said it, yeah, it is always there. Indeed, it is. It's not an option because it's imminent. It's always there. So failure is not an option. And this is what testing makes testing so important. Because if we test end-to-end of everything what we do, we get to build better software. So I'm assuming that all of you are writing, if you're a developer, unit tests. The room is awkwardly silent now. Yeah? I'm just making that assumption, and I'm not going to discuss that, because that's something that you should master. Even those who are just doing scripting. So for the PowerShell people here, or for the Bash people here, there's testing tools for that too, unit test tools. For PowerShell, that's Pester, by the way. And I'm not going to pester you with it, but it's something that you should get a hold of. All the other stuff here is really about all the other capabilities that we can find in testing. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I really need to make sure that I keep on my spot, because I'm actually on a camera, and that way I'll drop off screen. But as you can see, there's a lot of areas where testing is being handled and that you can come across with testing. Yeah? And we go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, all through what we call the stages of the theater of development. How does that sound as a little trip on memory lane? Right? All right. So the first thing that I was going to discuss with you is life is a stage and you need to play right. Okay, bad voice. So for those who were here, I think it was last year, Debbie O'Brien was here. She did a little bit of Playwright. I'm going to discuss Playwright also, just showing how easy it is to use, how easy to implement it is, and what it actually is, because not a lot of people might know Playwright, right? So the first thing that you need to know about Playwright is it's an automation library. And you have this in many flavors, and you can use it in many languages as you want. But the beauty about this is it has no browser hookings. It just uses the WebSockets, and it can integrate easily with all the web tools that you have in your browser. So think about all the logging that you can have. You can write that along with it. So there's all these little nitty-bitty cool things in there that you can actually use and abuse. Now, it's cross-browser. You can pick any kind of browser that you want. You can do WebKit, Firefox, Chromium-based browsers. It just works out of the box. You don't need any agents, and this is a little bit where Selenium does it a little bit different, because there you have a real tie-in into the browser. Yeah. And you really are benefiting the dev tools directly. Now, the easiest way to get started with Playwright is just download the damn thing, install it with npm, and get going. And then you need to start working with it. Now, the easiest way to get started with Playwright, and I need to make sure that I'm in the right tab here. Yes, all right. The easiest way to get started with Playwright is generate the code without writing the code, because we all are lazy as developers. At least I am. we all use Stack Exchange or Reddit for something, right? But what if you could just generate our tests and just mildly adapt them and make sure that everything works? So what I'm going to do here is just going to write a little cool test in Playwright against the NDC side, just seeing that it works and just going through with it. And we can actually generate this code. So if I'm doing this and give it a couple of seconds, because it needs to start out, it will start me a browser extension next to a browser where I can, come on, you're faster than this, man, come on. Yeah, here we are. So, and always it also starts, if you have dual screen, you always need to make sure that you drag it to the right side of the screen. So we need to do this, and we need to do this. So what it did, it generated me a window, a recording window. And I am going to make this a little bit bigger because this is not readable for you people. Here we go. Voila. And we're going to do this one. So what I can do is I can hover over all these little assets here in my web page. I can click on the agenda, and you can see that automatically all the code is being generated inside of the generator. So this is really handy. You don't have to type all the different testing pages. You can even see what kind of labels there are behind it, and you have a good idea of what context there are in your HTML and in your CSS and all the other things that you're using there. Now the cool thing is that you can actually immediately then like clicking through, I can even do some suggestions here like filtering and all these things. And all these things, all these locators are being perfectly rendered inside of my generator here, as you can see. You also have a good idea of where you have clicked because you actually get the highlighting here. Yeah? And the beauty about this is that we're using these labels instead of really pointers, because that way your developers and your designers can actually like separated from each other. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah? So you can still keep your tests alive after the fact if somebody changes. Now the cool thing here also is that you can generate these in the different flavors of choice for your languages. So if you want to do this in Java, you can actually do this in Java. If you want to do this in JavaScript, some people have an opinion on that. So if you're doing JavaScript, you all know we don't want to go there, but you can even do this in TypeScript or in just plain C# and immediately inject this inside of your unit testing. How cool is this? Right? So I can just easily change to the other language, and I immediately have this in C# written. Cool, right? Who've never seen this before? Still half of the room. That's good. All right. So now we can start using these things. So the only thing that you now need to do is actually save this or just copy paste this and put this into a testing file. Now, as you can see, you can do a lot of really useful things, and it's like clicking all through and making sure that they work. Now, when you're done, you also want to make sure that you can actually use those tests accordingly, right? Now, for this, we move it up a little bit, and we also have an extension in Visual Studio Code where we can play together with it. So the files that are generated are TS files or unit test files that you have. And you can just play these either from Visual Studio or from Visual Studio Code. Now, the easiest way is doing this through Visual Studio Code, especially when you're using TypeScript, because this will actually show you a very nice way of integrating these tests. So here I have my, my little project here, and I wrote a couple of tests here, and I'm trying to make sure that I can... This one failed because I closed the browser, but if I were going to run this thing again, now from here I can just run this test. And I can even start debugging it. The thing, what it will do now, and you see in the bottom left, you can have this little check mark with show the browser or not. So you can run this headless or headed. Yeah? And if I'm using this headless, headed, you will actually see that it will pop up the browser of choice that you've configured in the configuration file. And it will start walking through the different aspects of the test. So in this case, it is testing it, it is waiting for it, and what I was going to do here is back to the home page clicking. So this doesn't do much. If I now click this close, it will probably give me an error because the browser is closed, so that's good. And that will give me results back. If I'm looking at this one, for instance, so let's see, I got another test here. I think test 8 was a good one. No, not this one. 3 is a good one. So let's do this again. That's still running. Yeah, here we are. Let's try this one. Actually, this I can debug because I actually put in some breakpoints. Now it's waiting for it. Yeah, darn it. That's what you get when you misclick, of course. Yeah, the downside is for some stupid reason it always opens up the other window. So here we are. Now I didn't explicitly do the debugging type, but here we did actually do an assertion and an expectation of the page. So this is a test that deliberately needed to fail. What I did, I changed the go-to into an expect page, and it should have a title juice shop. Now, as you can see, the title is totally different. So this would have been a failed test in a full CI/CD scenario. So it's really that easy just to change those tests and just have them work upon assertions the way you extend them. The entire platform is really well documented, and you can do this in multiple languages, as I mentioned. And for each of the languages, there's a different implementation guide that you can just follow. It's really, really, really cool to take a look at. Now, it's all good and fun in games that you can do these tests, but somebody needs to automate this and look at the results. And the easiest way of looking at the results is that you can actually replay the full test. You also have the logging for it, but you can actually take a look on what's going on. Now, what I did here, and this needs to go to the browser level. We can close this thing. So what I did here is I have a pipeline here that I run on a regular basis. And at the end of my pipeline, I do have my Playwright test involved. Now, it's just a couple of tests that I'm seeing whether it's still there, whether some changes have happened, and so on and so on. And I tested against multiple targets, even multiple, not only browsers, but even multiple platforms. Windows, Mac OS, Safari, you can actually test against those too. Mobile platform or laptop PCs, whatever, you can actually test against those, and all configurable in the config file. Now, here you can see that I actually created a URI. What I do at the end of my Playwright test, I actually publish the result back because it generates me an HTML report, and I publish this back into a pages file. So GitHub Pages is really excellent for this because it's short-living, and I just remove it after the tests are done. If you want to have a little bit of more persistent thing, you need to figure something out there. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to click this thing, and this is a total report of all my text of all my tests. I mean, this is a little bit bigger. And as you can see, I'm running this against Chromium. I did this one against Firefox. This one is using mobile Chrome, so this is a mobile format. And this is the nice thing about it. I can click on the test itself, and I get all the details of all the different things that I've been testing, and you get some additional details of what kind of code that was used for it. But the beauty is actually here in the trace itself. So if I click on the traces, you will actually get a full walkthrough of all the things that you've tested against, even with all the network tracing stacks on the ANR logs. If you added that to the assets reporting, and you can really walk this entire thing through. So I can go step by step. It's loading here. It's going over it. Let me just see this. So normally you should be able to. I can go click by click, and you get all the trace information back. Why is it not loading? Come on. You should be better at this. Yeah, you just have to take my word on it, because you see it on the top, but for some reason it doesn't load inside of the screen. You see all the errors that are getting back, and you get even the attachments that are on there. You get the source code eventually on those things, and this will give you a full test result back. You see all the calls that you've been doing, the time over it. So really, like a test should be executed, and with all the additional information before and after. If that is not enough, you can actually fully replay it in a video, also as an additional programmable thing, and it will just be uploaded as an additional asset, as you can see here. So for some reason, yeah, it's in the bottom, as you can see. So I'm moving around all these little things. I'm clicking stuff. So yeah, for some reason the output isn't that good. Maybe if I just use another one, it's maybe a little bit better. Let me do this one. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. That looks better. So you can see it just opens up. I started clicking around and doing all these things. And you can even see some highlighting and stuff like that. So that's really, really useful for your testers if they're just needing to consult what actually did happen behind the scenes in a fully automated way. Right? So there's some specific actions for it. If it doesn't work, you can just do call the script, and you get on with that in GitHub Actions or in Azure DevOps for that matter. But it also works in Jenkins or whatever CICD tool that you have. I just use GitHub Actions because I found it fun and cool. All right. We talked about this, we talked about that. All right. First tool out. How am I doing? Okay. All right. People still didn't leave the room yelling, so that's all right. So the next part in the theater world is we need to build the scene and setting the scene. And this is a little bit on how you should test against what we call infrastructure as code. Now, there's many tools and many kind of infrastructure as code things that you can actually test against. Now, since I'm typically involved with Azure, I'm only going to touch these things, but other stuff applies here. Now, Microsoft has a couple of tools available for those. One of them is ARM-TTK, and the other one is PS-Rule. We also have something in the security toolkit, but that really just does scanning on a level of security only. So, and that comes later on in this show. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is ARM-TTK. I'll leave PS-Rule for the security part, and you will figure it out later why. So what we have here, ARM-TTK is a command line. So for those who are doing Azure, you probably someday had to write ARM templates or bicep files. Now, this file will actually help you understand your this tool will actually help you understand what is going on with your JSON or with your bicep file, and validate whether you're using the correct version of the APIs, and even some best practices that have been involved. So ARM-TTK, and this is the result. It's very easy to use. You just need to install it as a PowerShell module. You just do a test AZ template. And for the convenience and for the speed of things, I already did it here, and I let it go on a sample template that we have in the sample repository. And actually, as you can see here, this web app managed with the managed MySQL has some good practices in there, although there's some things here that should be changed. Like, for instance, location shouldn't be hard coded. You should be able to switch to a location if you need to quickly deploy to another area and so on. Also, if I were to use an older version of the API, it will give me an error. So all these things can be tested against, and it's fairly easy to use. You just do test AZ template and use the template either with or without the parameter file, and you can just start validating your template here. So this is how you can test not only your code and your application, but also your full solution before you're actually going to deploy and use this as a really good gate. When you're at theater, you're also going to do tryouts. And tryouts are typically testing the performance of your performance. Yeah? How are we doing? Is it going well? Do we need to rehearse our ticks a little bit more? Yes or no? You actually want to do the same thing with your application. If we're testing your application, there's a couple of things that we want to see. Is it sluggish? Is it still working or giving me errors? Is there good callbacks to the backend API? Is it full end-to-end? Now for this, we have something called Azure Load Testing. Now Azure Load Testing can be seen as a JMeter on steroids, because it does a little bit more than that. But you can actually just use JMeter files, for those who are in that open source world today, which is typically a standard for application performance testing. JMeter files can be uploaded and then just used against the web endpoints that you have. Now, there's a little bit more meat to the bone with this tool, because it can actually also eliminate the full testing infrastructure to powerful test your environment. And I know there's plenty of other tools like K6 and all the other load testing tools. But this thing comes out of the box inside of Azure. You pay a little bit for it. But the cool thing about it is that it can also immediately interact with all the underlying services that you're using, and you can see a cross-correlation between the performance of your application and the performance of your infrastructure. How's my throughputs going in the database? How's my throughputs going on the website? How many messages are in the service bus? All these things can correlate to the performance of your application. And this is something that you need to keep in mind and that you need to put together to get a full-blown 360 view of your application. Now, showing slides. By the way, I have way too many slides, so I'm going to go quickly over the other slides and leave them for your just reference afterwards. So you're going to get the slides somehow. I don't know how, but I'll figure something out. And you can read all the slides afterwards, but it's more important that you see it in action, right? So if you take a look at load testing, here we are. So I already did a test here. So it's fairly easy to set up. You have this test showing that setting up a test is fairly easy. I'll show that in a second. But if you run a test, so I had a test here a month ago. So this is actually just testing a simple web application. You can see the total requests that are being run, how much time the tests have been loaded. The average response time, how many errors there are, and then you have all these beautiful graphs giving you more insights on how the application was performing based on errors and all the averages that you can have. Now the cool thing here is that you can actually, and this is something that I'm going to show you here, if you go into the test itself, is it here? No, yeah, here. So here in the configuration, you can actually say what app components you want to monitor along with it and what metrics you want to monitor along with it. So here you can actually highlight all the hardware that you have. I immediately added everything that is in resolvement to that resource and to those solutions. But it could be anything, right? If you have an additional monitoring outside, you also want to test that, you could just add it and see how it results to that. So you can just add any kind of underlying services to that. So if you take a look then, at the bottom, you will see that all these different metrics and server or infrastructure metrics are being added. So you see all the results in application insights. You also get all the events back, HTTP 500 error messages from the app service itself, the number of requests that are being added, but also in a more IaaS way, just the memory and CPU percentage over the run. And then you have something which is more interesting. How is my underlying Cosmos DB reacting to the application? What is the RI and the physical partition throughput information? Seeing that, well, maybe I've configured something wrongly, this will be costly, or I will have way too many RTUs. So for those who are never done Cosmos, RTUs are just the request that you have per database, per Cosmos instance. So how will this react to this in a general way from performance-wise, but also in a cost way? Because if these partitions are way too low or way too high, it will result in a monetization thing. And cloud is also partially CDA, right? A cost-driven architecture. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. So this will give you a good overview. Now, there's plenty of more fish in the sea if you take a look up a little bit more higher, because this will give you granularly more insights, more from a... Somebody taking photos, or was that the screen that flashed really hard? Sorry, I didn't want to give you an epileptical attack, so sorry if that happens. So here you can see actually get more availability and performance information with some more intelligent insights. And the cool thing here is that we will also have some more like natural language requests on how is my application gonna get controlled in these things. You got really nice graphs here. You have a good, you got some features here that you can say there's no data here, not running on. Oh, okay, it's not for production. It's not, so that's only on the production parts, and that changed again. Yeah, right. We did do some estimations here. You can also cross-correlate that with change analysis if you need it, to see what changed and what could have been the impact. So you have a really nice performance and analysis on top of all the things that you have, even with application crashes, and cross-correlating this with application insights. So I was lucky, no application crashes happened here. And to top it off, we can even compare our different runs that we had and compare those against each other to see whether my app is more performant or less performant by the last changes that we pushed to production, for instance. So that's really, really nice. So here you have a good overview on both the test run names. You see both of them, they're performing differently. Here there's something else happened. Yeah, here I cut off the test, so that's a little bit different. You also see that here there was more requests than in the purple one. So you can really cross-correlate even on the metrics level of the underlying performance. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do here. And useful, of course. When we take a look at the test itself, you can just configure this fairly easy. You get a test plan here that you can set up. You can just upload a JMX file, so a JMeter file if you want to, or you can download it from here. You can even change that from that part. You can add additional parameters if you need it. You can define the load for it. So, of course, the more load you add, the more costly it becomes, but it's fairly easy to set up. So don't forget that if you're doing the slide totally to the right, to discuss this with your CFO, because you'll probably break the bank at a certain point in time, right? Just so you know. But it's good that you can test against a full performant army of users. If you're planning, like for instance, a full SaaS product and you want to really make sure that you test it end-to-end, do that in combination with this and the Playwright, and you have a full end-to-end story on that part. And then you can test for millions of users if you have a business plan that is aiming at millions of users, just for that. Also, the monitoring you can configure so you can add additional underlying infrastructure for that matter. Right. So as I mentioned, leave this to your reading. The only thing that I want to mention is the CICD part. So you can easily inject this into your pipelines and your deployment pipelines or building pipelines if you want to, depending on where you want to push your tests. And for that one, I did it after the build and after the deployment. So there's a load test here. And what you get out of it is you get some averages, and you can talk to these averages and use them as a gate again. So if they're underperforming, you will actually get a false back, and this will actually just kill your pipeline and say, all right, there's something wrong here. You need to up your game, and you need to make sure that that performance is being done. You actually get more information on how many users there are, the average testing parts, the gets, the adds, depending on the APIs that you're testing against, and so on and so on. So, and this can be used then in a full CICD gating mechanism for your benefit. All right. It's opening night. And what we typically say in the theater is, not good luck, but break a leg. Now, please, if you step out, don't break a leg. Yeah? It's not fun to have fractures at a conference. I know. We had some incidents last week. But breaking a leg means good luck. But there's always this one element of surprise. And you know, Murphy is always behind the corner. There's always chaos everywhere. And this is where chaos testing comes into play. And chaos testing has actually two values. It's first of all testing security-wise, but also resilience-wise. You want to test what if something goes wrong? How will my solution react? And how will my entire solution collapse? That's basically it. And this is what Chaos Studio is about. You're going to test against your entire piece of infrastructure solution. And I know infrastructure sounds as a dirty word, but it's also the services that you're going to consume. It's not only VMs, right? And you want to test against that and see what happens if you take one of those Lego bricks away. Now, if you did it with a mortared house, probably the house will collapse if the stone is large enough. If it's a small stone, probably you will not notice it. It will just be a blip in the matrix. So what we can do with Chaos Studios, we can actually start designing experience based on a fault library. And this is the most important part of the entire Chaos Studio part. Yeah? We have fault libraries on an agent base, which you can inject inside of VMs. And this is where you can actually stress test your VMs and see how they react to failure. Now, spoiler alert, VMs are not the most resilient way of running workloads in the cloud. Right? Although most of our services running on VMs, yeah? But we do this in a scalable way. But VM is not a real cloud thing, and it's not a real way of running cloud in a very decent way. They do not scale, and the resiliency is a little bit harder. We have mechanisms for that, like scale sets and all these things, but still, setting them back up, bringing them back online, backing them up, it's hideous and tedious, and you don't want to go there. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what yours is, but you're an ex-Microsoftie. Please say that you're on my side. All right, at least I have one vote here. So, but you can stress test these I/O-based, because that's typically the bottleneck. Is the disk full? Huh? For the sysadmins here, disk fulls is typically, yeah, you didn't do a good enough job of cleaning up all the old SharePoint files, if you're still running SharePoint on premise. But it's all these things that can actually break your full environment. And if there's more services running on your environment on one single server, it will also break. So agent-based and testing all these endpoints, very important. But it becomes more and more interesting when you're doing the service directings, right? You can break Azure Cache, for instance. Cosmos DB failover. What happens if I take away Cosmos DB in one area and put it into the other? That's really the cool thing about it. And then, of course, the golden boy or girl this time of cloud native, Kubernetes. What happens if my pods fail? What happens if my services get lost? The networks disconnect. We have fault libraries for all these things and can easily inject those into those experiments and work along with them. Now, you can define these experiments fairly easily in the portal. You can also do this into a JSON-esque kind of way. And the way you set it up is you actually have an experiment metadata. You have all the multiple steps, and in those multiple steps you have the actions that you want to take. Now, this is how it works in theory. In practice, it looks something like this. So, I have Chaos Studio here, and just need to go back one step. Yeah, that's the downside. There we go. So I have my experiments here. So an experiment looks something like this. If I edit the experiment, you will actually see this. So what I'm doing with this experiment is I actually have one branch, and this branch will test against a Cosmos DB. So the step here that I'm going to do is use the fault library for Cosmos DB failover and see how my application reacts. Now, for the sake of time, I'm just going to have it failed over and see what Chaos Studio actually will do with it. And this will test against a Cosmos DB, force it into a failover, and run this test for 5 minutes. So if you were to have a full end-to-end integration test, that would mean I'm going to take out that part, and that part, and you want to consolidate it for the full solution to see how your full solution will react to resiliency in that point, in that matter. So if I go back to the experiment itself, and if I'm going to run this, voila, and I move over to my Cosmos DB instance, you will see that at a certain point in time, and the only downside is here is that they didn't foresee a refresh button, so I need to do it like this. At a certain point in time, my Western Europe environment becomes my secondary, and my Northern Europe becomes my primary. And why is that? Probably my chaos environment. It's still pre-processing. 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 Come on, do it already. Let's refresh and see if it's already doing something. So it didn't get the waiting to start. Yeah, it needs to wait for a queue. Now it's running. So now, if I do a refresh, you will see that the trigger has been given to fail over the database and to move it over to another region, if all goes well. There you go. As you can see, the state is being updated. And in a couple of seconds, the two regions will be just switched. Now, if you were to do this for every element in your solution, and then check the reports afterwards, you would actually get a full feedback on all the things that have happened and how they actually cascaded and broke stuff. So this is what you need to do to test your resiliency, and maybe you can even combine this with performance testing, because what happens to your solution if you do that at full load, right? So you want to make sure that this gets fully automated. So you see, it's bringing all these little bits together to have a full end-to-end solution for your stability of your application. All right. Any questions, by the way? Because I talk and I talk and I talk, but I don't get a chance to give you guys room for questions, which is also, yeah, there's at least one. Yes? With AKS? Yeah, you can test against all your service endpoints with load testing, for instance, and you can also use Chaos Studio to drop your pods out, drop your nodes out, drop your networking out, and see how your application will react to it. So there's a lot of, so AKS is just a host for your solutions. Yeah? And all the testing mechanisms that you have here, if you have front ends running on your AKS, you can use Playwright against it. It's just an endpoint that you're testing in. But indeed, it can be combined with AKS. All right. So it's opening night. It's showtime. So now you need to secure your seat. And you know where this is heading to, right? Security testing. Typically, I also talk about end-to-end developer security. This is just a part where we do the endpoint testing, but also developers come into play. Now, the first thing that you want to use as a security testing tool is that PS rule thing that I mentioned earlier. And what is PS rule? It's a set of rules, and it's about 300 plus something rules that you can use that are aligned with the well-architected framework. And the well-architected framework is just a patterns and practices box that is being handed to you as, look, these are the best practices that you can do when you're deploying to Azure, and these are the things that you shouldn't do, and these are the things that you should do. Yeah? And it can be easily integrated in the command line, also in GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, Jenkins, doesn't matter, you can just run it. It's, again, a PowerShell thingy. And it makes it easy for you to implement the testing before you actually go to production and validate your infrastructure as code to see whether you did a good job. Now, it looks a little bit similar like ARM-TTK, but this even goes further because this tests against performance, it tests against security, operational excellence, all the 5 pillars of the well-architected framework. Making sure that you actually trap errors before you actually deploy. Now, how does this work? First of all, there's this command line thingy that you can use. So that's this thing. And just to test it, oh, all right, this is fun. To test it here, I just gonna let it go on some bicep files that I have. It also works with ARM or vice versa. What I can do here is just run this thing. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. And this will test and validate to see where some of the policies that I've set and some of the rules that are applying are actually being followed. So there's things like, did you use tagging? Did you use injection into a key vault? If you're using a key vault, do you use an auto-rotation policy? All these things that come to play. And as you can see here, some of these fail because I didn't enable my firewall in my file. I didn't use any tags. I did do a good job on securing the audit logs, because I don't output secret values. I use an admin username, so sensitive properties, and you get good feedback on what actually happens there, and even some mitigation to foresee eventual faults in the future and avoid them. Now, if you run this in a full automated mode, which you can also do, as I mentioned, there's steps for PS rule. You actually get all these things back, and you can use these again as a gating to deploy. And as you can see here, I'm using the PS rule here. It actually has some nice ASCII output, which is very nice. And then you get all the no rules were found here, so that's okay. So I'm using it, and here we are. So here we have, for instance, an error. Oh, that's on the expand. I thought it was going to be a better error. So there was not a default value for the parameter here. There's also there was another error here that was interesting, and for some reason, here we are. Here are the full errors. So here's a warning on the logs were suppressed, so that's not a good idea. So maybe you should up your game here. Recommendations that you get. You also get the path where it is from. And here we have a really issue, and that's the same firewall issue. Azure Rule 355. So a key vault should have a key vault firewall. and only accept explicitly allowed traffic. So these are things that you can test against and make sure that your environment is a little bit more safe. Now, to top that off, there's a community workbook available to actually get that data back from log analytics and actually take a look at, in the conjunction to the full 5 pillars of the well-architected framework, and to see here, for instance, for the security part, you can actually see all the failures. You can click through on that to get a nice graphical overview. And this is just installable inside of your Azure environment as a community playbook, which is available on GitHub. This is being made by CSA from Australia, which is a really good, a really useful tool to check your compliance and check your validity of your environment before you're actually going to deploy against it. You can even use those tests against the complete deployed infrastructure to get better outputs there too. Do note that PS rule also reports back the same things for security in Defender for Cloud, so there's a co-play there. But that's, at least you have an idea of what you can do in facts of cost, for instance. It also tests against here. So there's rules assessed, and they all look positive to me, so I'm doing a great job, and so on and so on and so on. For the sake of time, I need to hurry up, because I only have 9 minutes left. And still got a couple of topics to talk about, especially some that I just added, because thanks to Louise Fraser, she messed up my mind this morning saying, did you know about this testing tool? And I didn't, Microsoft testing tool, so I'm going to also answer about that one. We did that. Oh yeah, I need to talk to you about security testing in GitHub. We all seen CodeQL, and we all see Copilot and all these things. I have 20 minutes? Oh, okay. Well, no stress. Why was I in my mind that it was 14:30? Okay, no stress. I can go over the security part a little bit more further. So security testing from a developer point of view is something that we hate, right? Because security is not always the first thing on our mind. It should always be on our minds. But sometimes it's being made harder on us because of all the things that we need to take care about. Now, the first thing that we want to focus on as a developer is do that shift left motion. If you're using GitHub today or Azure DevOps, because it now also works on Azure DevOps, yay, there's this thing called CodeQL and dependency management and secret scanning that you can have as a testing capability in your repositories. Now, not much there, but what I'm going to show you anyway is that if you look into GitHub, for instance, I can do this one. Made this a little bit smaller. Yeah, all right. I guess now I can have my full screen here. Come on. Here we go. Yeah, the 3 dots. Is it also a kebab menu? So security wise, it comes now with, it's an add-on for GitHub, but it's a very cool add-on. Why? Because it will test against your dependency management, seeing where there's vulnerabilities in all your packages that you're using, and we're using a lot. Have you tried a standard JavaScript application? Loads of packages that loads. There's vulnerabilities in all of them if you don't use the latest version of JavaScript and so on and so on. If you're using Node and whatever framework, there's always dependencies that you need. This is a testing that you can use during and after the pull request. But it's important to know that there's vulnerabilities on things that other people make, and make sure that you don't get shot in the foot by those things, so that you have at least a good idea and that there's a fix for it. Now, the Dependabot will do pull requests and automated mitigations if your code will still build. So you can do that in a fully automated way, but if you don't trust that, you can still do this manually, and then it will open pull requests, and you can just review the pull request, do a build here, and as you can see here, this one is doing a minimist bump to another version from 21 to 24, for instance. So that's for Dependabot. You also want to make sure that your code itself is secure, and for this you need code scanning capabilities. Now, there's plenty of tools on that level. Now, the cool thing here is that if you take a look at CodeQL in say, it uses intelligence based on databases on your code, and the best practices that we have acknowledged into the industry. And this will actually show you, based upon the language, there's only a few languages really supported, but most common languages are supported. What it will identify is, it will identify a bad practice. In this case, URL depends on a user-provided value, so there's no validation. So you could be conceived as a injected value here, just a little bit like SQL injection. What we're going to do here, so it's a forgery request. What we're going to do here is we see the result coming back. It explains you what you did wrong, of how the attack would work and how the weakness would work, and what the recommendation is to fix it. So there's some examples here that you then get to fix it and how to make it better. If you then use this in combination with Copilot, for instance, and say, make my code more secure, it will actually show you the same results back from the CodeQL thing. So that's really, really cool. And since we've all watched Build, or we are not there in person, elsewhere I would say you would all be added to the Beyond the wait list, but that's not applicable for the people that actually chose the wiser thing and went to NDC, right? I'm talking about you guys. I just gave you a compliment. You can cheer for that. All right. Good. Oh yeah, this is recorded, right? All right. Time to look for a new job. No, but really, if you're taking a look at developer security, this will be a guidance to make your code a little bit better and take away some of that technical debt that you result against, and how your security can be tested against your code. Last part in the advanced security part is the secret scanning. This is a really fun one. And this can also immediately work on pre-commit phase. So once you pre-push phase from your PC. So once you're going to do a push back to the branch in GitHub, it will actually block it on your PC, because that rule will be injected first, and it will look at, oh, look, you have a secret here. You don't want to push that into the repository, because it's a pain to get it out of the history. It's a pain to get it out of the repository at the end. This will scan for all the most known secrets that we can identify based on multiple vendors. So this can be on AWS, this can be on Azure, it could be on, I think even the GitHub keys are being recognized, of course, because there's always a certain kind of string way of manipulating things. And like, for instance, here I have an Azure SQL database connection string. And I was so stupid enough to fully inject it. And as you can see, it highlights the pattern that it recognizes as a database. And yeah, stupid as I was, I also inject my password and my user identification. So that way now hackers can just use that information and log into my database. Oh, you can try it. It's dead, the database, so don't worry about it. I'm not that stupid. I may look stupid, but I'm not that stupid. And to top it off, it doesn't only recognize it in certain kind of files. Oh, by the way, never put config strings in web.config, please. Don't do that. And to top it off, it will also recognize that in other files. This repository doesn't have the text file, but I also topped it off in another repository just in a text file, so it also recognizes it in other files beyond certain types of files, so it even goes there. And in this case, this is a public key. It also recognizes a secret here inside of a bundle, which was a public key that you needed to connect to some of the APIs within Microsoft. So yeah, we really recognize and do a lot of things. And now this is also possible in Azure DevOps. So you can also benefit from it there. An additional testing tool, if you just want to use this in either CICD or just on your command line, is using the Nuget package, which is called microsoft.security.devops.cli. This has the Guardian tools included, and it can also run CredScan on your PC. So you don't need to do this from within GitHub. Don't tell them you know, right? But this is just publicly available. But it also does Terraform scanning. It does template analysis. It does ESLinting. It does bin skim. So it actually analyzes a lot more than just the secrets, and it can also look into the binaries that you have with bin skim and see what is possibly happening there. There's multiple tools there, really, really cool, and you can just let it go on your code. I'm not going to demonstrate this for the sake of time. the show is happening and we want to be as inclusive as possible. Because everybody is entitled to a good show, right? Even the Belgians. Now he's awake. But that brings us to a topic which really is dear to me. There's a couple of people here running around that are also doing accessibility talks. Like, I don't know when Dennis' talk is, but if you have the chance to see Dennis' talk on accessibility together with his mom, go and check out Denny the Cleric's talk with his mom. It's divine, really, I'm telling you. But we need to be inclusive as possible. And the best way to have reach on our software is to also be inclusive there. And for this, we have Accessibility Insights, which is a tool that can check for the accessibility of your software. Am I doing the correct things? Like, for instance, I really made a big mistake by creating this PowerPoint file, because nobody does alternate text on PowerPoint files. A lot of people don't do PowerPoint files in the wrong way. Why is that alternate text important? Because visually impaired people are still able to listen to your PowerPoint file when they read through it, or read the context of the PowerPoint file when they read through it. Because as you can see, I put a lot of images in my slides, but if I put an alternate text, it will actually allow you to describe the image and give a visual feedback to the visually impaired. So that's a little bit the thing. And we should do most of these things with our software. Now, we have tools that can test against those. We have tools for the web, we have tools for Windows, and we also have tools on mobile for both Android and iOS. But the iOS, they pulled away for a time because there's some issues there, and they're just fixing that. Now I really have to hurry. Now I have 9 minutes. So how does it work? Well, I'm going to show you in the web, and the funny thing here is, if I go to Day2KX, that's that juice shop thing that I showed you earlier for my Playwright testing. This website is really funky. It's just a website that is used for security testing. I use it for all my demos because it's really complete with a lot of stuff in there. And the thing is, it's really bad in accessibility. First of all, there's a lot of automation tests that we can do here from an accessibility point of view. The first thing that you need to do to test the accessibility of that site is to install the extension. It's called Accessibility Insights for Web. It's based on Chromium, so you can run it both in Edge and in Chrome itself. If I open this, voila, I get immediately Accessibility Insights for Web. I can do a fast pass, I can do a quick assess and then a full assessment, and I can also use some ad hoc tools. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this fast pass test. And this is really, really cool. So I'm just going to, no, I didn't ask for that. I asked for this. Voila. I'm going to put them side by side. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger to make sure that everybody can see. So here there's already some failed tests that have happened. They're automatically checked. So first of all, there's all the area attributes, and area is a standard that you can incorporate. And to give you more information on how this works, what the search query is about it, the snippet behind it. But what you need to do is you need to make sure that it can be searchable. You can highlight them from here, so that way you can actually get an idea of what's going on there, why the issue is here, and so on and so on. So you actually get insights on that, how to improve. The other thing that I typically find annoying is, and this is really fun, and most desktop developers fail against that, is the tab logical order. How many times does it happen? And it's not only for it's not only for those who have an impairness, it's also for us users, because as a usability, how many times does it happen that you do a tab and it ends up there and there and there and there, all cross-load, or even just doing an enter? Now, this tool will actually test against that. So if I now would say, how can I test this? Now I can say, I'm just going to click here. And now I'm going to do a tab. And you will see, yeah, that's tab 1. Tab 2. Now it will move over. Where did it go? Oh, there's possible failures detected. Why? Because I don't know where the tab went. So now if I do tab again, now you see the little line. See? Yeah, sorry for the people in the back. It's hard to see probably, but there's a little line from going from A to B. But where's the tab in between? We don't see it. A spoiler alert, it's totally at the bottom. So somebody set the tab wrong. So I can go back again, and now goes into the items page. It moves from there to there, so you can actually see it goes from left to right. That's really not a good thing, right? So that's not the way you want to do this. So you can test against those accessibility issues and work with them, even from a full CI/CD point of view, so make sure that you can actually do that. It even works with Windows applications, and there's a full client that you can use, and it uses the same principles. It's just a little bit more performant and a little bit more a little bit more juice behind it, and reporting also. Now, spread the love, start using those, because I don't think a lot of people knew this one, right? Who never got involved with accessibility testing? I think all of you, come on, be honest. All right. Now, Louise, thank you again for this thing. I hate you for that. This morning I got added a little bit more tools. The Microsoft Graph Dev Proxy, because you also want to test against APIs, and not just any API, because this is Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy, but it will also test against all the APIs that you can, as long as you add it to the trusted and testable links for it. What it does, it allows you to mock APIs and test fully against, and it will give you good visual feedback on that one. Now, and I'm going to wait until you took a picture. There we go. Just for the fun of it, I have here this tool open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start that testing tool. It's called MGDP. There's an AK.ms for it. It will start monitoring on port 8000. It's going to use a proxy. And here, from here out, I'm going to do, where is it? I'm going to invoke a random joke by Chuck Norris, because there's an API for it. And I'm going to push that back into the local host. Now, what it will do, it will validate, first of all, it will give me the response back. But it will also show me whether it passed through the API correctly. It will give me some information extra. If I would do this against, for instance, the graph itself, you will actually get a little bit more information, because that API is pretty simple and pretty straightforward, and it worked. But I also had this one. And this will show some failures against the API. Here you have it. So there's too many requests, because you can actually give the number of errors that you want to see, against which errors that you want to validate, and so on, with what failure rate. And this can all be configured from that point of view. You get some warnings, you get some chaos, even some tips to follow in best practices to improve your API calls. So this is also a testing tool, and thanks for that, for testing your API endpoints. Collaborate with load testing and maybe some chaos testing, you can get a really nice show going. So that I really had to quickly drop in there. And then the last thing, the applause, the laughter, the feedback. Because you want to have your users deliver feedback. We already got some feedback through the accessibility testing, but you also want to see how your application is handled by your users. And see if you didn't do any functional issues, like where are my buttons placed? How is my rage clicking going? And for that we have Clarity. And Clarity could be seen as a marketing tool, and it could be seen as a Google Analytics, but for me it's more on UX. Because how are people using your site? How long are they hovering over a certain link? How are they rage-clicking buttons? Is the button working, yes or no? And Clarity actually will help you in identifying all the issues that you might have on a site level. Now, luckily, all that data has been added already. So if I go to clarity.microsoft.com, in the test that I showed you, it also refers to that website, that juice shop. I added some JavaScript injection here, and this will test on that site, and even live, as you can see, because the site was just open, I can just click in there and actually see the live recording of this. Now, this is fully GDPR compliant, by the way, just so you know, right? So don't go complaining about this. You see on what platform it is running, how it has been run, and you can see it will fully replay the entire thing. You even hear the clicking sound. The most important part here is, if I do this, and just go up to the custom part and just open this thing a little bit. Here we go. Yeah, they should have done some usability testing on the site itself. But if I do this and I go from September 1st to now, and I apply this, I get all that data back. And the most fun information is actually coming from this thing, the heat maps. Because the heat maps, they show up a little bit, and for those who paid attention into my slide, they just play a little bit of Predator on your website. Because you can there see how many clicks certain environments or certain URLs get throttled by. As you can see here, there's this area here. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Yeah, it's not really zoomable, and it stays small, of course. This area here is actually, the more clicks there are, the redder the area will become. If it's less clicks, then you will only see the number there. So this will give you a good idea on how you place your UX and how you should handle that. All right. I'm almost there. So we did the heat mapping, we did the additional stuff, but wait, there's more. And don't worry, it's just a mention. So there's two more tools that can be mentioned here. First of all, there's test management. If you want to have your test cases fully written out based upon the requirements and all that stuff, you can do that in test management. You can all the work items added. And you can even inject your Playwright tests in there and just drag and drop the URLs for the Playwright test results. There's an additional thing. How many desktop developers are here? Well, still a few. Now, the only thing that you still need to do is, how are my packages and my applications being tested against load and multiple deployments on multiple environments at the same time? Even there's something to be found at Microsoft. We have test-based, where you have an MSX or an MSI that you have, which you can use by your IT department or by your website if you're having an application that you actually develop for end users. That you can just test against full load on different platforms, where you can even add some additional scripting and test the application, whether it starts yes or no, and whether it will be performant and how it will perform, and whether it will crash, whether it will align with all the rich keys that you need to inject, and so on and so on. Okay. And with that final word, that's all, folks. 2 minutes. All right, thank you for staying in 2 minutes extra. Don't forget to vote.